Hello and welcome to Western Civ. Um, I recently completed a trip to Colombia. It was the first major trip that I've experienced really since the COVID hammer went down a couple of years ago and things just got massively off the rails. So I wanted to put a supplemental out there, just kind of with my thoughts of the experience and some historical sites that you might consider visiting if you're interested in traveling there. There's a lot of interesting quirks about traveling to Colombia that I thought I would pass along to anybody who's interested. Now, I'm recording this both as a podcast and as a YouTube channel offering. If you're interested in seeing the images that I'm going to be talking about, and you're listening to this on the podcast right now, you might want to click the link in the show notes and watch it on YouTube because that's where the pictures are going to be. If not, it's no big deal. And I'm putting all the links in the show notes for anything important that I'm talking about. So, with that caveat, let me just go on here. I'm going to give you some basics. Um, so, first of all, there is an online document that you need to complete when you get into Colombia. It's very difficult to find information about a lot of this stuff online. I Googled it, and still some of it wound up surprising me at the time. And I will say, in general, I think that Colombia is going to change a lot in the next 5 to 10 years as more and more people, especially from North America, start to travel down there. A lot of the things that I'm going to mention are probably going to be altered. The name of the form is called Checkmate. It takes like 2 minutes to fill it out. The reason that I know that it takes 2 minutes to fill it out, and by the way, they might not ask you for it. They did not ask me for it when I arrived in Colombia. They didn't ask the person ahead of me, and they didn't ask the person behind me, but that doesn't mean that they won't ask for it at some point. So it's worth filling it out. The problem that I ran into was that we were having a very difficult time finding flights that would work to get into Medellin, which is one of the cities that we went to. And so I took a chance on Spirit, which turned out to be a huge, huge mistake. Um, Unfortunately, the employees wouldn't let me board my flight in Chicago, which was going to Florida, and then from Florida to Medellin, because they said I needed the Checkmate customs form filled out for Colombia, even though I was just flying from Chicago to Florida. And Florida is not part of Colombia, for those of you who are not aware. And unfortunately, in this case, it was just an employee who had the wrong information and didn't understand and wouldn't let me get on the plane. So I wound up essentially losing a day of travel. So don't go with that airline. It's a terrible experience. Sure, weather happens, mechanical issues happen, but if the employees are so poorly educated about the necessity of what you need to travel that they won't let you get on a domestic flight without having something needed for international, then I strongly recommend going somewhere else. Also, when I came back for the subsequent flight on the same airline, no one asked for the form, and no one ever asked for the form. So go figure. Another piece of advice that I received going into the trip was that you don't need cash. Everywhere takes credit cards. That was about the worst piece of travel advice I've ever received in my entire life. You need to bring cash. Bring cash, change it at the airport, or just change it before you leave. The fact of the matter is, while a lot of places do take credit cards, it is not everywhere by any stretch of the imagination. And most people will take it with a lot of grumbling. So I don't recommend trying to get by with credit cards. You can in most big restaurants and things like that, but you're going to want some cash and it's just way easier. I recommend, if you're going to go for, let's say, 5 to 6 days, changing maybe $300 worth of US cash. The exchange rate is phenomenal. It is a very, very, very cheap trip, as I'll get into a little bit more in a moment. So if you're looking to budget, this is the place to go. You get anything that you could want to throughout the Caribbean or South and Central America for a fraction of the price. So I do recommend it from that extent, but you do want to have some cash. Do not consider renting a car under any circumstances. People drive like it's Mario Kart. It'd be very dangerous if you didn't know what you were doing. It's very normal for taxi cabs to cross into the opposing lane of traffic to go around something and so on and so forth. You don't want to engage in that. Trust me. The last thing I'm going to say is that you probably do need some Spanish in order to get by there. As I mentioned before, I think 5 to 10 years, this is going to change to a large extent as more people from North America come on vacation, but it's not there yet. So most of the people who are on vacation there are people from other Central and South American countries. There's some Americans, some Europeans, but that percentage isn't high enough yet so that a lot of people speak English. You need some intermediate Spanish to be able to get around. What I do recommend for flying is to fly Avianca, especially when you're in Colombia itself. The flights are like $100. They're extremely cheap. It's very easy to get around. You can take a bus, but it's going to take you 8 times the amount of travel time, and it's not going to save you that much money. So check out Avianca to get around when you're there. One of the first two cities that we went to was Medellin. I definitely recommend this. I did not go to Bogota. I talked to a number of individuals who did. They didn't recommend it necessarily. If you want that mountain experience, Medellin and Cali are much more appropriate. You can use Ubers to get around everywhere in Medellin. It was fantastic. I don't recommend buying souvenirs within the city itself. I'll explain why in a minute. The neighborhood that we stayed in, and this is in the show notes, is El Poblando, which is definitely like a tourist, more party places, but there's lots of restaurants, there's lots of bars. It's extremely walkable if you stay in that area, so I do recommend it. It's a city, though, just like parts of Chicago or Philadelphia, and certainly New York City or San Francisco. It can be very gritty at times, so it's not Cancun, and that's to be expected. In terms of Medellin restaurants, La Causa, I highly recommend Alambique. These are both in the show notes. Um, they're beautiful restaurants and they do a wonderful culinary scene. But here's where I really want to come back to. One of the big benefits of going to Colombia is that you can get what would probably be a $180 to $200 dinner there for about $70 US because of the exchange rate. So it's really a place where if you are looking to hit some of the more top tier restaurants in a region, it's very doable there. And so I recommend it. But those are two of my favorites while we were there. Very popular. You don't necessarily have to have reservations, but it can be very useful at times. Couple of things I recommend doing while you're in Medellin. One is a coffee tour. We did one that was just outside the city. I think you can go to more picturesque locations that are further away, but if you want a half a day experience, they certainly have that there, and that's what I would recommend. These are easily discoverable on TripAdvisor. I also recommend going to Guatape. Guatape is kind of a giant rock. It's actually, I believe, the third biggest rock in the world. It's maybe about an hour and a half from outside of Medellin. The tour that we did included a visit to Guatape itself, which is a nearby village. That's where I recommend buying the souvenirs. There's excellent artisanal crafts there. If you go with a tour group, everything is very reasonably priced and it's easy to find things that you would like. We loaded up on stuff for family members there. It was wonderful. And you can also couple it with a boat tour. Guatape is kind of based in what is today we would call a large reservoir. It was man made, actually. And so you could take a boat tour if you're interested in sort of seeing some of the sites. If you are watching on YouTube, the bottom right hand picture is actually a picture of one of Pablo Escobar's old encampments, which you can see from the boat. It was bombed by a rival group, and the government simply never rebuilt it. They're going to do something with it apparently at some point, which is another point that I wanted to bring up, which is Pablo Escobar. Yes, a lot of people are interested, especially because of the Netflix show Narcos, and they want to ask questions about him and so on and so forth. And I would say most people are more than willing to talk about his involvement in the countries and the way that, the narcotics sort of played a role in the fracturing of the country in the 1980s and 1990s. But, it's kind of like in the United States, if you were not from the United States and you got off the plane and all you wanted to do was ask the guide about, American chattel slavery and racism. Yeah, some people are willing to talk about it, but not everybody wants to. So just be aware that there are individuals who may have lost family members as a result of some of those conflicts. And you don't want to, you want to be a little bit sensitive about bringing some of those topics up. But Guatape is an excellent tour. I highly recommend it. I'm switching now to Cartagena, which is the other location that we went to. Um, the first night that we got there, we spent an evening on the main island that's directly adjacent to the harbor in Cartagena. Cartagena is on the northernmost coast of Colombia. It borders the Caribbean Sea. It's beautiful city, as we'll get into. Tierra Bamba is the name of the island. There is shockingly little information online about this island. Here's so let me give you the basics and all the stuff that I wish I would have known before we went. So Tierra Bamba is a mix of private and public beaches, but a lot of them are public, so nobody can stop you from walking back and forth and so on and so forth. It's a big island. So, really, the only ways to get around the island are by boat. So, sort of the boat takes you from fishing village to fishing village or spot to spot. Do not expect to go there and be able to walk across the island. It's simply too large for those sorts of things. Um, Generally speaking, people go in the morning, they party during the day, they hang out during the day, and they go back at about 5 or 6. The island effectively shuts down between 5 to 6 p.m. because that's when the boats take you back. All right. And speaking of boats, when I read about the island, it said you go to the harbor and you get on a boat and they take you across. There's not really a harbor. It's it's a beach, and the boats pull up, so you're gonna get wet getting onto the boat. You know, you're gonna get wet up to your shins, depending. The times that we went, the seas were very calm. It was easy. It was a 10-minute ride back and forth, no big deal. But you're gonna have to get in and out of the water to get there. So be mindful of what you're bringing on that day. If you can avoid it, I would avoid bringing huge suitcases. Certainly, there are guys there who will help you with them for $1 or $2. But it's a lot easier if you're going to spend the day there to leave your stuff at your hotel room, or if you just flew in. There's a lot of hotels that for $5 will just watch your bag for you until you get back. And so you can just take a backpack with whatever you need for the day and so on and so forth. It's much, much easier that day. Um, there's not really a place to buy things. There's no convenience stores once you get to the island. I highly recommend buying water and bringing water with you as you go across. Also, most places won't yell at you if you bring your own bottle of alcohol. It's a lot cheaper than buying it there, so you can certainly do that. Essentially, when you go to the island, you can book a place at what they call beach clubs, and you get to spend the day there sort of relaxing. That's the essence of the island. You can stay overnight, but only at a few locations. And please note, if you stay overnight, it's probably just going to be you and a security guard there and any other families who happen to be there at a time. I think this will change over the next 5 years, but right now, Tierra Bamba is really just a daytime location. We stayed at a resort called Marine Beach, and they had online glamping, and I've got a picture of it there. And it was perfect. It was wonderful. You could actually get a view of the city from the island overnight. I've got that picture there. I really do recommend it, but it's there for relaxing. Just understand that once the sun goes down, there's very few people around. There aren't bars to go to. There aren't restaurants necessarily to go to. You have to go with what you've got. So let's talk a little bit about Cartagena itself then. I recommend taking a taxi or taking an Uber down and getting a hotel in the old city, in the walled city. So it's relatively small, but that's where everything is that you want to see. And once you're in the old city within the walls, you can walk everywhere. Never take a cab. It'd take you longer than if you just walked. The streets are extremely narrow. There's a lot of people around, especially in the evening. And I will say this also, since we're talking about people, I kind of follow the Chris Rock has a joke about, neighborhood is safe if there's, women out jogging alone. And I kind of follow that same procedure when I'm traveling. If I see a young woman walking by herself, then it's a safe spot to be. And everywhere that we went in Colombia, there are plenty of people around. Never felt the least bit unsafe at all. So I don't think that you'll have a problem with it. It's like any tourist place. Of course, you want to be mindful of your belongings, but that's about it. Once you get to the old city, there's a couple of key recommendations that I have. First, there are a number of free city tours that you can find online that are a couple of hours long. They'll take you around and show you the main points. I would do one of those. Now, there's a caveat here. Sometimes they say that they're free and they cost, 20,000 pesos, it turns out, when it's all done. Now, that's not anything to worry about. 20,000 pesos is about $5 US. So it's not expensive, to say the least, of what you would probably give someone as a tip anyway. So I recommend doing a free city tour. I recommend hitting the Museum of Gold. It's free. You can go in, you can spend half hour to 45 minutes. They've got some nice old artifacts there. Definitely, especially in the evening, close to sunset, take a walk. You can actually walk on the old city walls most of the ways around. There'll be tons of people out there in the early evening. You can sit and have a drink, watch the sunset over the Caribbean Sea. In addition, there's a, I mean, like any old city, Cartagena was founded in 1532. This is a city that's full of old, beautiful churches. You can see them. There's tons of cheap sites. There's tons of museums that you can go to. And again, because of the price differential, they're all very inexpensive. So I recommend them wholeheartedly. In terms of food, there's a lot of different options here. Soleli is definitely my number one recommendation. If there was one place you were going to eat at in Colombia and you needed to make a reservation, it would be there. Hands down, best meal I've had in years. And again, what would have cost probably $300 in the United States wound up with full bottles of wine and everything costing just under $100. So I very much recommend making a reservation there. You can get them relatively easily as long as you're planning far enough in advance. Another thing I recommend doing is walking around a nearby neighborhood. It's just outside the walled city, maybe a 5-minute walk, called Getsemane. Getsemane, it's pronounced with an H, even though it looks like Getsemane. There's a series of neighborhood bars. Essentially, everyone just sort of puts chairs and tables outside of their apartments and they serve alcohol there, really inexpensive. There's street food that's available for purchasing. And every Saturday night, there's a dance competition that's 100% free. Teams from around the world, we saw one from Texas, one from Chicago, another from Mexico, who will come and they'll perform their customary indigenous dances. It's all free, and you can watch the whole thing. It's right; you can't miss it once you enter into the neighborhood. You hear it for blocks around, and you'll see all the people. You can go watch for a little bit, leave, go get some food, come back. Highly recommend it. Last few recommendations. Again, bring cash because ATMs are there, but they're not necessarily reliable. One evening we had to go to 3 to find one that functions. You got to enjoy the people and walk around. Everyone's very nice, but just be prepared to say no, gracias, a lot, because I think I was offered a hat at least, I don't know, 27 times per day that we were there. So that's rounding us out at about, I don't know, 200 times over the time period we're there. It's fine. You just say no gracias and keep walking. It's not a big deal. So those are the recommendations that I have. I think it's a lovely trip and definitely worth considering. If you're looking to find a lot of history, there's a lot of interesting things there. These were just some quick pieces of advice if you needed that in advance of the trip. And as I said before, all the links are in the show notes.